Uh, okay, take it away, Dan.
Yes, thank you, Rick, for the introduction, and thanks for everyone for your forbearance for allowing me to appear virtually. As Rick said, I have some health issues that are making it very difficult for me to travel, at least at the moment. So, the title of the talk uh, is about gangsterism, the current gangsterism of the United States in the world. And I think it wasn't the title I came up with, but I think it's a very good title for what's happening. Um, Let me just kind of give the lay of the land as I see it, where we're at in terms of U.S. foreign policy, and maybe even beyond that. I think the one thing that we're seeing in the world right now, and I think probably best exemplified by what's been happening in Gaza and in the West Bank as well, is that there are no longer any limits, any moral or legal limits that the West places upon itself in conducting itself abroad, but also at home. And for example, I'll give some examples of this. I just saw today a 19-year-old American citizen who also is Palestinian. He was killed in the West Bank. And not the first American citizen recently who's been killed in Palestine, and then there's been several arrested as well, young people arrested by the Israelis. This, being an American at one point or European would give us a certain shield to people around the world. There was a thought that, oh, if the Israelis, for example, it could be someone else, but if the Israelis kill an American, oh wow, that's going to cause an international incident, and the U.S. is going to somehow retaliate, right? But there is no, again, there's no outcry about this killing. Most people don't even know about it. Um, Another example of this has been the treatment of these people on the flotilla, right? The couple flotillas that have tried to bring humanitarian aid to Gaza, and they've all been captured by the Israelis. A number of and all these are Westerners. They're all Europeans, Americans, Australians, and including Greta Thunberg. And almost all of them were mistreated in some way or another. Even Greta Thunberg was beaten, apparently, by the Israelis upon capture. One of the folks on the flotilla, I believe she was from Germany, claims to have been raped by the Israelis. Now, what is the point I'm trying to make here? That I think with what's happened in Gaza is, as I said, there are no limits as to what will be done to people or who it will be done to. And we live in a world essentially where there is no rule of law left. And in fact, that is the way that the powers that be want it. And in particular, I think the Trump administration has crossed some of the last Rubicons of in terms of transgressing legal and moral limits. By the way, can people see me? I now look, okay. It seems like I'm looking at the floor or something. I don't know, but that's fine. Um, and this is disturbing, right? I think if by the way, I think Trump is really kind of the logical kind of extreme of what we've been seeing in successive U.S. administrations. Um, Look, the U.S. has always been imperialistic. It's always been at war. It's always been willing to intervene in other countries, pretty much at will. Though, at least for the most part, at least at least they come up with some sort of moral or legal pretext for it, right? They were fighting communism and had to defend democracy. They were engaging in humanitarian intervention to stop a genocide. Now, almost invariably, those claims were either exaggerated or untrue or just pretextual. But I do think there's something, I think the pretexts are still important, right? In the sense that there was at least some acknowledgement that you just couldn't go invade another country for any reason. There had to be some legitimate reason to do that. Now that's out the window. There's really no claim that what the U.S. is doing in the world is based on anything other than the U.S.'s naked self-interest. And when I say the U.S., of course, I don't mean uh, really the nation or the people of the U.S. I mean the self-interest of the ruling class, of a very small number of super wealthy people who have decided that they want to super exploit the world of its resources. Um, Again, Gaza and Palestine, I think, have set the tone for this new world in which violence can be meted out by the West, and in particular by the U.S. and its proxy Israel, for no reason or any reason at all, and the most extreme violence that one can think of. I mean, it's coming out now, for example, and it's not a fun thing to talk about, but um, it's very clear that, for example, in Palestine, um, Palestinians in Israeli prisons are being um, uh, raped on a large scale, and in the most brutal of fashions, and that includes children that are being arrested. Um, and again, this would be something that would shock the conscience at one point, and yet it's virtually not discussed at all in the Western press. Um, I think also, when you look at the kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, that the U.S. went in and, first of all, killed 100 people in the operation on January 3rd, I believe it was, kidnapped a foreign head of state and his wife and brought them to the U.S., again, under barely any pretense of legality. I mean, first of all, there was no legality there. Under Article 2.7 of the UN Charter, you can't intervene in a country like that. The claim was that Nicolas Maduro was somehow the head of a drug cartel, but by the time his first arraignment in New York City, that charge was dropped, and the U.S. admitted that cartel didn't even exist. So there's barely a pretense, again, for doing it, except that Trump wants Venezuela's oil. I mean, again, that's pretty much now what's being said, that this is not about democracy, it's not about freedom, it's not about human rights, it's about oil and who's going to control it. And essentially, again, going to the gangsterism analogy, it's a giant shakedown operation, right? So they've taken hostage the president and his wife. They've threatened to do the same to the succeeding president, Delcy Rodriguez. And under coercion, she has agreed to give up some oil concessions to the United States and to U.S. companies. And again, this is like a mafia type operation. They've essentially gone in, the U.S. has muscled its way into Venezuela and taken over its oil fields. And again, with barely a pretense, except that they want the oil for U.S. companies. Similarly, these bombings of these boats in the Caribbean and the Pacific now, I believe in the Indian Ocean too, were over 100, I believe over 131 people been killed so far. They're just bombing boats and killing people on the pretext, at least they have a pretext, I guess, that these people are drug traffickers, but there's no due process, right? None of these people have been tried in a court of law. In fact, I was asked, I represent a family of a fisherman, Colombian fisherman, who was killed in one of these operations. And I was asked by CNN, they said, well, how are you going to prove that the deceased fisherman, that he wasn't dealing in drugs? I said, well, where I come from, I don't need to prove that. It's the U.S. that has to prove that he's guilty, right? Like, what is this that I have to prove they're innocent stuff? I mean, that's not how the world works. That's not how at least that's not how I thought the world worked. I said, in fact, all the people killed are innocent. You know how I know that? Because none of them were found guilty. So, of course, they're innocent until they're found guilty. But we're being groomed to believe that it's okay just to kill people based on an allegation. And it would be no different if a cop went to someone on the street here in Pittsburgh and said, "Oh, you're a drug trafficker," and just blew their brains out. Well, no one thinks that's right. I mean, Um, and by the way, even if someone was tried in a court of law and convicted of drug trafficking, it's not a capital crime. Even in a death penalty state, they wouldn't be given the death penalty. So there's nothing legal about any of this. But again, I think it's a way to wear down the moral and legal sense of people, where they accept what would have been the unacceptable. And that's what's very troubling to me. And we're seeing that now brought home. I mean, I think when you're looking at these ICE operations where they're now routinely detaining people who are here even lawfully, even some citizens, detaining them for a long period of time, mistreating them. There's a lot of allegations, again, of detainees being raped and sexually assaulted. Um, and they've committed not only no crime, they haven't even violated the immigration laws. Um, again, I think that's part of terrorizing the population, and again, destroying on purpose the rule of law and any pretense of due process. And it makes this world a very dangerous world for all of us. And unless we resist this, I think we're going to enter a very dark period in history. That's why I think what happened in Minneapolis was very important, where you had, a medium-sized city who came out in incredible numbers. I think a huge percentage of the population came out to challenge the military occupation of their city, and they won. They've largely driven out the U.S. occupation forces, which is what they were and are. And I think that's an important precedent. And I think you're going to need to see more of that. Again, lest we lose the freedoms that we have left, and unless we lose being even a republic anymore. I think the idea of whether we are even still a republic is becoming a big question. Let me talk a little bit about something. I know I'm going all over the place, but I think that all these things are interconnected. in terms of this kind of shakedown operation I'm talking about, one example of this also relates to my client, who is the president of Colombia, President Gustavo Petro. He's a very progressive leader in Colombia, probably the best president and most progressive president Colombia's had, maybe ever. And he ran afoul of the Trump administration in a few ways because he became a very strong advocate of Palestine, a very strong critic of Israel. He actually threw out the Israeli diplomatic corps out of Colombia, also cut off coal shipments to Israel, which were very significant for Israel and its energy production. He's been outspoken against U.S. intervention in the region, against these, bombings of the boats, and he pulled Colombia out of its partnership with NATO. Maybe many of you didn't even know that Colombia was a NATO partner, which is strange enough, given that NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and last I checked, Colombia is not in the North Atlantic. But in retaliation for all these things, and again, as a means to try to essentially control Petro in Colombia, the U.S. put Petro, his wife, and son on what's known as the OFAC list, the Office of Foreign Asset Control list, which essentially is an economic blacklist. It prevents one from having any sort of economic life. For example, the bank accounts of Petro and his family were seized after that. Travel is very difficult because it's hard to get an airline to be willing to fly you anywhere. Even Petro had trouble getting his presidential plane refueled shortly after he was put on this list. And again, it's very clear this is being done not because Petro's done anything wrong, but because he's not compliant with what the U.S. wants out of a leader in the region. And so now, of course, the U.S. wants different concessions from Petro and Colombia to, in return for lifting these sanctions. And again, this could be done to anybody, this sort of extortion, and that's really what it is. In Venezuela, for example, in addition to Maduro being arrested, the U.S. now claims to have a secret indictment waiting for the new president of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez. Should she refuse to comply with what the U.S. wants, they'll drop that indictment on her and maybe kidnap her. So, again, we've entered a world in which none of us should want to live, a world of complete lawlessness. And that's how I think our own personal lives, we have a stake in what's happening abroad as well, because it's also being used against us. But in addition, obviously, there's a moral issue here. Again, at some point, I would say, and it's hard to say when that point was, but certainly after World War II, I would say the idea that a big country that could just go and invade another country and seize their resources, that was not considered appropriate by most people, right? And that you had the UN Charter, of course, after World War II, which said specifically you can't do that. And one of the reasons the UN Charter was founded was to prevent that sort of aggressive behavior by a state. But I think also amongst the populations of the world, it was decided that, look, we don't want that type of world anymore. We don't think that's correct. And we think that no people are better than another people, right? And that's, again, one of the foundations of the UN Charter, that every member state is equal to every other one, from the tiniest island nation to the biggest, most powerful country. You still are equal, and your sovereignty matters as much as someone else's sovereignty. And again, that's why, to the extent the West and the US decided to invade another country or go to war, at least it tried to have some justification for that. That, again, went beyond mere self interest, because people no longer accepted the idea of naked aggression. And then I think, and then of course, you had with the liberals like Clinton and Obama, you had something called humanitarian interventionism, where, they tried to justify intervention based on, again, human rights, preventing genocide, again, because they felt that to get the population to buy into these interventions, they had to have those types of justifications. And I think where we're at now is the U.S. government doesn't think it has to make those justifications anymore. That we're now back to the law of the jungle. We are back to might makes right, and that the powerful countries will dominate the poorer, less powerful countries at will. And again, that is not a world that most of us think in the 21st century is acceptable, and it's one that we need to resist against. For the other reason being that it seems to be leading us down a road in which we could have a major, conflagration, a third world war that could involve nuclear weapons, and that could very likely start in the Middle East. It's thought even as early as this weekend, the U.S. may start bombing Iran. And where that's going to end, it's not clear. Israel is the only country in the Middle East that has nuclear weapons, even though it never declared them. And will Israel be willing to use them against Iran? I mean, maybe. Would that bring in China and Russia, perhaps? But this administration doesn't seem to care about any of those things. But we have to. All of humanity is dependent on preventing that type of scenario. And I think that makes, again, I think it makes this president different from other presidents in another respect. I think since the nuclear age began, every U.S. president, for all of their faults, they thought that one of their main jobs was to prevent nuclear war. That this would be a scourge on all of humanity, had to be prevented at all costs. Apparently, even Ronald Reagan wanted to get rid of nuclear weapons, all of them, after watching a film about nuclear winter. Again, I think we're now in a world in which our president doesn't think that he has to prevent that. I think there's reasons for that, by the way. I think it's because our ruling class also doesn't feel any need to preserve the earth, right? I think they view their goal is getting out and leaving us behind, right? Maybe going to space, maybe living in a bunker. I saw at one point that Elon Musk was planning to build a plane that through solar energy could just revolve around the Earth for years. I think the ruling class doesn't feel a stake in the world like it used to some extent because it had to, right? It just had to because no matter how rich you were, you still had to live amongst us and use our roads, and that's not true anymore. At least they don't view it to be true anymore. They think technology is such that they can again get out somehow and leave us all behind. And I think there's actually a mad rush for them to take as many resources as they can to be able to create that scenario for themselves, to allow them to make that escape. And they're happy to let the world burn in the meantime. And that is a scary ruling class, right? That is a ruling class that must be resisted at all cost and overthrown. I mean, they have no legitimacy because that's their view, and I'm certain that's their view. In fact, I thought it was very telling during the COVID era. You know, when most of us were locked down, at least to some extent. Three of the main, most famous billionaires decided to go into space at that point. Do you remember that? Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Richard Branson. They all had, again, while all of us were sitting around locked down, they all had these very public launches into space. And I felt that they were telling us something. Again, they were telling us, hey, you suckers, you got to stay in your house on Earth, and we're just going to go leave you. And we can do that anytime we want. And also at that time, it should be said that the lockdowns were structured as such that there was the largest redistribution of wealth upwards in human history during that time. Something like in the trillions of dollars, and I don't want to give the exact number because I forget, but it's undisputed that it was a massive resource shift upwards to the rich. You know, again, at a time when if we lived in a decent world, those resources would have in fact been redistributed downwards to the people, right? But that's the world we live in, and I think the foreign policy that we see reflects that. And we need to get a hold on how we will resist this in order really to save all of humanity. I think nothing less is on the line than humanity at this point. Not just its physical survival, but its moral, its survival as a civilization. Again, when I look at what is being done to people in Palestine, I just see humanity, what we thought humanity was, is being destroyed. The whole notion of human empathy is being systematically dismantled. And I believe on purpose, by the way. And I can talk about that more. I think that's true in Syria as well, which I'm happy to talk about. But I feel like I've talked quite a while, and maybe in a meandering path. So why don't I open it up for questions?
Okay, thanks, Dan. We've got our microphone here. I'll pass it around the audience then.
And again, I cannot see anyone. My view is obscured. I don't know what I'm looking at this point. But
Yeah. Can you aim your computer at it? What's that? Well, your camera part. this is the camera, but it was going in and out and distracting, so that's why I put it down like this.
And
I
that's
can,
fine. I can just listen. I'll
yeah,
let you call on people then, and I will
okay,
just
yeah,
yeah.
we're getting feedback from the microphone here, so I don't, do people want to, let's see, where? Maybe if we just talk with it, like not too close to the mouth, it'll work. Okay, any questions? Okay, I'll do Rich and then Jim.
Thanks for that talk, Dan.
Oh, there we go. Hi.
I heard through Rick that you recently were at the White House with President Petro.
Yes.
And met with Trump for, I don't know how many minutes. It could have been short, it could have been long, but I'm curious to ask. I can certainly hear that your idea of the Trump administration matches what I feel very closely. I'm curious to know if that meeting caused you to modify your assessment of Trump in any direction? Like, did you feel that he was more ignorant than you had thought, or more immoral than you thought, or more capable of understanding people, or did it modify up or down your sense of him and his alertness?
Yeah, I don't know if it modified it so much, but I will give you my take on him, or at least, first of all, I think who Trump is depends on the day you find him, right? I mean, it appears that he's a pretty erratic person, and how lucid he is one day or whatever, I think it goes, from day to day, maybe hour to hour. It happened to be that I think we caught him on a very good day in which he was alert. He was friendly. He seemed to like Petro, which was very important. Um, he seemed open to things like, for example, dropping the sanctions against Venezuela. It was Rubio who clearly doesn't want those sanctions dropped. I'll tell you that Petro said after the meeting he felt that Marco Rubio and JD Vance were much more darker personalities than Trump. So that's very interesting. Um, Again, I think we found him on a good day in which he wanted to get along with Petro and find a way to get along with Colombia, which was good. I mean, that was the goal that we had, certainly going into that meeting. So I'll just say that the Trump, at least we found, was reasonable. I'll just say that. That doesn't mean he's reasonable all the time, but at that moment, he was.
Well, thank you very much for uh, putting together all these pieces and saying what should be clear to all of us by now about what a mess we're in. But could you elaborate a little bit on what you meant when you said we're no longer a republic?
Well, yes. I mean, I think at least the way I view what a republic is a country that at its core is governed by the people, um, in a certain democratic way and governed by a rule of law. Um, that it's essentially, again, a country governed by the people, for the people. And I don't see it that way. I see it now as governed by a small clique of very wealthy people. We certainly have democratic forms, right? We go to the polls ever so often and we pull a lever, and we have a limited amount of choice of who to vote for, some choice. Um, but I think that at the end of the day, um, we have very little input into what our government does, right? I mean, look at Trump right now. I mean, the Trump administration right now. People, if you look at the polls, the people are against pretty much everything he's doing. They're against these, at least the way the ICE raids are being conducted. They're against the tariffs. They're against intervention in places like Venezuela. But that doesn't stop the government from continuing these policies, even when the courts tell them to stop. There's been, I believe, hundreds, if not thousands, of cases, for example, where courts have told the Trump administration to let some detainee, immigrant detainee go, or to bring them back after being deported. And the government, the Trump administration, just ignores it. And we'll see what they do with the tariffs, because the Supreme Court just invalidated the tariffs. We'll see if the Trump administration complies with what the Supreme Court said. Again, in many cases, they're not. You had the judge in Minnesota who said ICE should not be firing upon or arresting protesters, that's not within their purview. Did that stop ICE from doing those things? No. So you don't have a country governed by law if that's the case. If the courts rule on something and the government doesn't comply, well, then what? Who's running the show? There's no legal, again, limits on what the government's doing, and the will of the people is not a limit on them. So what kind of country do? I mean, we live in. First of all, Jimmy Carter, the late Jimmy Carter, years ago said that we don't have a functioning democracy. I mean, that's not a new point at all. He said, and many have said, we live in an oligarchy, right? And I think that's true. I mean, if you look at, again, even the choice of the leaders we have, I mean, the difference between the two parties and different politicians are minuscule. I just saw that AOC, is she in Munich right now for this some sort of conference on global security? And she said that Trump's big mistake in Venezuela is that he left the government in power, that he didn't go far enough. Right? That's AOC. And I think when you look at Gaza, the same thing. I mean, there was no difference between what the Democrats wanted or did and Trump. In fact, you saw that, and it's now well understood and the Democrats did their own, polling and research after Kamala Harris lost. And they found the biggest reason she lost was because of her position on Gaza, because her base was against her position supporting the genocide in Gaza. She and the Democratic Party would rather have lost than change their position on Gaza. They knew they were going to lose, or they could lose very well, because they maintained that position on Gaza and they did it anyway, knowing it was against the will of their own base. How does that represent any sort of democratic system, right? The ruling class is going to do what it's going to do, and we have decreasing amounts of say in that. Again, I would say, I gave the COVID example too, where again, the policies that were put in place were not to advance, the health of the population, but to advance the hoarding of resources by the super rich, right? It wasn't done for the benefit of the nation, and wars are not being fought to defend the homeland. They're being done to go and exploit other countries, again, not for the benefit of the people, but for the super wealthy. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's a question whether we still exist as a republic or whether we become something else. I think we need, I mean, this sounds, I don't know what this sounds to people, but truthfully, we need revolutionary change to create a new republic, is my view, you know. Um, that's my thought.
Yep, yeah.
I just noticed the similarity between the Israeli, the IDF in Palestine, essentially in their campaign of ethnic cleansing. I mean, that after the so-called peace plan, they're not killing as many people as they used to, but they're killing enough to terrorize the population and essentially trying to make the people there self-deport. And the West Bank too, they're just, it's just this kind of slow, methodical killing, tearing down the houses, trying to get them to self-deport and leave. And it seems like here in the United States, ICE and maybe it's called nativism are doing the same thing. They grab people, they just beat people up, it's like terrorize immigrants so that they'll self-deport and leave the country. I don't know what you can say about that, but it seems like our strategy against immigrants is the same as Israel's strategy against the Palestinians.
Well, to some extent, and by the way, I mean, it appears that ICE is trained by Israel, right? So, I mean, given that, it's not surprising that they use a lot of the same tactics. And again, I have to point out this sexual humiliation that's being used against people in the U.S. by ICE mimics that being imposed by Israel against the Palestinians. And again, I don't think that is a coincidence. And yeah, I mean, I think there's to some extent, the violence against the population in the U.S. and again, not just against immigrants. Let's be clear. I mean, these assaults that are happening against citizens as well. Yeah, at least 2 citizens killed in Minneapolis. I mean, these were, it couldn't have been more kind of American pie than these 2 people who were killed. I think it's being done to terrorize the population into submission. Again, to be essentially groomed into accepting a more authoritarian system. And then that's what's so dangerous about all this. And yeah, they're using a lot of the tactics of Israel, and Israel trains a lot of police, a lot of domestic police of the U.S. as well. Yeah, so I mean, the policies that we're seeing in Israel are being brought home. I mean, there's no, and again, by intention, I think. I think Gaza is and this is the scary thing. Gaza is a laboratory, right? It's a training ground for the future. The future that they want to impose on us. In this case, they're going what Trump, with this so-called peace plan, he wants to impose, build this a resort over the bodies of all these dead people, and then the Palestinians left are going to live in squalor. And again, I think that's the world that they see. That's the world that they want for the future, for all of us.
I'm going to ask a question about resistance. One of the things that you said was we need to resist. How do you see that? I mean, there's a lot of marches and rallies, and I mean, but as you said, they don't give a hoot about our resistance. They ignore it, just like they ignore the courts, just like they ignore. And I don't think that Trump is in charge. I think he's an idiot. And I think that the ruling class is where we need to, and how do we affect the ruling class? I mean, mass movement. I mean, Marx said that the masses were the motor force of history, but I don't see it right now. So I just want to know what you think we can do.
Well, I think it's a great question. Again, I did give the example of Minneapolis. I do think there was a victory there, and I like to point to victories. I think it's important to see that resistance is not futile, right? That there was change that happened because, again, I think it's something like 1 in 3 people in Minneapolis came out onto the streets when it was like -30 out. Which shows that, and the government's largely relented. They haven't totally left Minneapolis, but they've left in huge numbers. So I do think it shows that people banded together with a goal. In that case of preventing a military occupation, can be victorious. Um, so I think mass movements are very important. Mass demonstrations. I also think there's a tool that could be used that really isn't being used, and that is withholding of labor on a mass scale, a general strike, for example. The unions could play a much bigger role than they have. They've been relatively quiet in all this. Much to their shame, I think. Even, Trump has laid off hundreds of thousands of federal employees. Most of them are union. These are very good union jobs. And what have the unions done to protest that? Nothing. So I think there's tools we have that we're not even using that could be very powerful. That's my view. And the other thing, I do like these flotillas. There's going to be a flotilla to Cuba to support the Cuban people. You have these flotillas to Gaza. I like these direct actions. They're very risky for the reasons I said, but I think that's the best of humanity. People who are willing to put themselves on the line to show social solidarity. I think that's a very powerful uh, thing to do.
Speaking of Cuba, um, it appears that this latest blockade is ready to wipe them out. What do you see as the future of Cuba?
Yeah, well, I'm very worried. I think what you're saying is correct. I mean, you're looking at a situation where they're denying the country any energy, denying them medicine and food, and it's a siege. They're laying siege to Cuba, as Leningrad was laid siege to by the Nazis. Um, I don't know what's good. I don't know what the future holds. I very much worry about it. Apparently, there's some negotiations happening between the U.S. and the grandson of Raul Castro. I don't know anything about him or what his views are. Will they coerce the country into abandoning the revolution? I mean, I think that would be a hard thing to pull off, but I think there's what I do see in the future, sadly, at least in the short and medium term, is great suffering that the Cubans are going to be made to endure in the interest of this attempt at regime change. And it saddens me. And there's really no countries that are willing to really stand up to it. You have China and Russia that are willing to send some aid to help Cuba, and that's good, but nothing on the scale that, for example, the Soviet Union did to support Cuba. So I don't know. It doesn't look positive. I'll just say that.
I just wanted to ask, why do you think that the unions are not active? Why aren't they? I mean, do you have any thoughts about that?
It's a great question. I was a union lawyer for 26 years for the Steelworkers Union International here in Pittsburgh. So I have some thoughts on it. I have some basis for what I'm going to say. I think there's one thing is that they've become very bureaucratic institutions that largely focus on getting dues to support the bureaucracy and people who work for the bureaucracy. I guess people like me when I worked there. Um, it's a business, really. They call it business unionism. The unions, you know, over a period of time, were purged of their militants. I mean, certainly during the McCarthy years, for example, and beyond. And now, again, their view is just to survive and perpetuate themselves without a larger social vision. For the most part, there's some unions that are exceptions to that, of course. But I think they have a largely go along, get along attitude for the reason that I said, which is unfortunate.
Given everything that you made so clear today, how is it you think you can help Petro? What can you do for him or for the country?
Yeah, well, again, I feel that the meeting we had with Trump ended up being successful beyond our wildest dreams. That is, I think we made some rapprochement with the United States without Petro having to give up any of his principles. He agreed to some cooperation on drug eradication and going after some drug cartels, providing energy to Venezuela. These are things that he would do anyway. I mean, so I feel that we've already accomplished something great. Now we're trying to get him off this OFAC list as well. We have some lobbyists that we're working with to do that. Because of the success of the meeting, we think that we may be able to help in that regard as well. So I'm pretty optimistic about it. Again, the meeting was something. In fact, after the meeting, I mean, I was getting calls from people in Colombia saying, this is incredible. You know, people are just thrilled down here. They can't believe how well that meeting went. And it was a great moment, to be honest. So it gave me some hope. Sometimes miracles happen, you know.
Good work.
Thank you.
Hello?
Yes.
Everyone's aware of how Trump has gone after Stephen Colbert and TV personalities, about those who are really critical of him in the news, like Lawrence and Eric Bunker and people like that. You feel for them as I do?
Did you get that, Dan?
Yeah, I think I got it. Yeah, I mean, I think that Trump uses his bully pulpit in a way I've never seen a president do that, where he's bullying, as you say, TV personalities and academics and whole institutions, right? I saw, for example, that Purdue has withdrawn all of its offers to Chinese students in part because of pressure from Trump. I mean, he has wielded his power like a bludgeon against people. And again, it's important though that people and institutions not give in to that, you know, because it just encourages him to be honest. It takes some courage not to give in to it, but yeah, it's very troubling. I mean, I've never seen the use of presidential power in this kind of way, not in this brazen kind of way.
Any more questions?
Well, I think we can, maybe we can wrap it up there, Dan. So let's give a good round of applause for Dan.
Well, thank you. And again, I apologize for not being there in person, and I appreciate your time this evening. And I have 10 books out, so check them out. And I wish everyone a good evening. I do think there is hope, and I do want to leave you with that. I do what happened in Minneapolis did give me a lot of hope, and I don't want people to despair. I think that is the greatest sin, as we know, is despair, and we have to maintain our resolve. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Dan.
Thank you. Take care. Bye bye.
Down with Fetterman. Right.